Hello, little Vickies. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome if you're new. Tonight I'll be sharing 4 Glitch in the Matrix and other creepy stories that are allegedly true. I post every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday by 5 p.m. Pacific. If you like what you hear, please subscribe if you haven't already, hit the like button, and leave a comment, as it's all incredibly helpful to my growth here on YouTube. Now it's time to relax and get on with the stories. This all started a few weeks ago when my husband decided to go into his parents' attic in the garage to see if any of his old Pokemon cards are worth any money. His mom has kept literally every toy he's ever had, so there are dozens of boxes of his things that we've been going through. We found a box that clearly hasn't been opened in a long time, as it was taped up and had plastic grocery bags laid on the top from a store that hasn't been in our town since the 90s, and it's full of his family's old VHS home videos. His parents documented so much of his childhood, so every night we've watched a home video after supper with his parents. It's been really fun, and the videos are from the late 80s/early 90s. A few nights ago, my husband put a new tape in the VHS player, and the first thing we see is my cousin's 16th birthday party from 1994, and I am in the video. His parents have no idea how they have this tape, and the weirder thing is we have no idea who filmed this tape. I've asked all my aunts and uncles, and no one knows what I'm talking about. The video also has me hunting for Easter eggs at my aunt's house also in 1994. My parents never owned a video camera, so it's not their tape. It doesn't make any sense how my in-laws have this tape. We've been trying to come up with logical explanations for it, but we can't. My in-laws say the box of tapes hasn't been opened since they put it in the attic when the garage was built in 2002, which is before I even met my husband. I would have been only 11 years old when they built this garage, so it's been up there this entire time. It's not like I somehow brought this tape over and forgot about it. I'm an amateur horror story writer. I wrote a character named Alexandra Waterbury, a ballerina who has an abusive ex-boyfriend who shares her sexually explicit pictures with his friends without her knowledge or consent. A few months later, I was scrolling through my newsfeed and came across this news article about a ballerina who has filed a lawsuit against her boyfriend and his company for sharing her sexually explicit pictures and videos without her consent. And her name was Alexandra Waterbury. I had literally never heard about her before I wrote my character. I picked the name Alexandra because my favorite actress is Alexandra Daddario, and the surname Waterbury because it's the name of a town in the TV series Slasher, which I used to watch back then. That is one of the most insane things I've ever experienced. The coincidence is mind-boggling. Nearly 5 years ago now, I was dating a guy called Charlie. My mom felt terrible because she could never remember his name and always called him Jacques. We always poked fun at her as, well, we live in the UK. How do you remember Jacques but not Charlie? After we broke up, my mom continued to ask me how Jacques was, and particularly about his dog, what she believed to be a Labradoodle. Charlie had a dog, but definitely not a Labradoodle. My mom insisted I'd sent her photos of this dog that didn't exist, all the while referring to Jacques. Sometimes it would get on my nerves as she'd completely fabricate memories of stuff I'd done with Charlie. I thought she was winding me up. Fast forward to now. I'm currently in the beginning stages of dating a guy, surprise, surprise, called Jacques. You can probably guess what kind of dog he has, too. I haven't told him yet, didn't want to freak him out or scare him off, but my mom and I have been in a constant state of what the fuck since I met him. We think that some of the memories she used to make up are things we'll do in the future. Edit. I still get a lot of notifications about this, but don't have the energy to reply to everyone, sorry. We're living quite far away from each other now, so haven't properly started dating, but we're best friends and both admitted to wanting to date as soon as we're back together in real life, hopefully soon. I don't think my mom's predictions had a global pandemic in the equation, but yes, it's going well for everyone who has asked. Thank you. This has happened several times at this point. It started about 16 months ago when I was cleaning my house around 12 a.m. My husband, boyfriend at the time, worked nights, so I had adjusted to his schedule. I usually kept the blinds open during the day and would go around closing them at night while I tidied up before bed. Our room was my last stop on the first night this happened. The curtains and blinds were open as I was sweeping the floor when I felt the sensation of being watched. I looked around me when my eyes focused on this silver sedan parked outside my house, mostly in the grass on my front lawn. Now, for context, my bedroom window is about 15 yards from the road in front of my house. It's a small front yard in a pretty densely populated neighborhood. Anyway, I saw the car before I saw her or him. I'm not sure, but there was clearly someone sitting in the driver's seat of the car and another person standing about 5 yards from my window, clearly staring at me. The only reason I could see this is because the moon was fairly bright this night. I shrieked and dropped to the floor and crawled to the light switch to turn it off so I couldn't be seen. I called my husband to ask him what I should do, and he told me to call the cops. Duh. I did, and of course, by the time they got there, the car was gone. They asked if they could see my security footage, and I agreed, but the footage from that section of time was just gone. It skipped over the few minutes that they would have been outside. This has happened several times since then, and I've completely given up on calling the police, as I feel as if they think I'm crazy. I have no proof that this is happening, but I would like to have some opinions as to what they may be doing. In the past 16 months, it's happened probably 10 times. Sometimes the person is standing in the yard, and sometimes they aren't. Also, the car has been different every single time. But the light is always on inside the cabin of the vehicle, but when I go to look, the people inside are never looking to where I can see their faces. I'll run to grab my phone to call someone, anyone, but they will already be gone. Okay, so I hate writing lengthy stories, but here we go. This event happened in May 2003. I grew up in small rural town, Illinois. Growing up in my neighborhood, everyone knew everyone. All the adults knew each other and all the kids on that block. As a child, I never really put it together, but my parents and all the adults in that neighborhood threw a lot of block parties. All the adults would typically gather onto one porch and drink, smoke, and play loud music. As we slowly watch our parents get drunk, all of us kids would be playing in the dark, jumping on the trampoline, swimming in pools until 12 a.m. sometimes, on a school night, the good old days. On one of those nights, my mother decided to have the big party on our backyard deck. Later on, when people started to arrive, one of our neighbors brought one of their friends over. This was something I didn't know until after the fire. I'm sure my mom didn't care anyways. I remember being in the swimming pool, which was right next to the deck. I was with a few of my neighborhood friends. I remember smelling food on the grill and cigarette smoke. I remember my crush splashed me in the face, and of course that made me want to turn around and splash him back. As I turned around to say something witty like, "OMG," I got caught off guard and startled when I heard this woman scream, and I looked over at her and she was staring at my house. She immediately stood up and told my mother that my house was in flames. My house was fine at the time, so now she is starting to look a little crazy. My little sister was too young to understand what we all thought, that she was crazy. She took her words literal and thought our house was currently on fire. She started to cry. She was 6. So my mom asked the lady if she could leave since she was scaring her children, and I'm sure my mom was a little freaked out, too. As her friend escorts her off the deck, she says, "She will cause the fire I see," pointing to my older sister. My older sister was in the front yard talking with her friends. We all thought it was strange that night, even after she left, but life goes on. So fast forward to September, Labor Day weekend. My younger sister and I are at my uncle's annual pig roast, more like a big Mexican reunion. My mom and her husband were on a motorcycle ride in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. They were at a rest stop when my mom received a phone call from our neighbor. When she answered the phone, our neighbor said in a very hesitated voice, "Elizabeth, I don't know how to say this, but your house is on fire." Our neighbor thankfully called 911 and said that they're on the way. After that phone call, my mom headed over to get us, and we all drove to our house that was now on fire. When we pulled up to the house, my mom told us to wait in the car. I remember looking at our house and seeing all the flames and all the smoke. It was a bit traumatizing. My mom started freaking out because she thought our nanny, our second cousin/family member, was inside our house. My mom called our babysitter, who answered right away and told her that she was coming back to the house with my older sister right now. My mom thought that was strange because our nanny was practically living with us, so she was watching the house for that day. My mom was told that the fire was caused by our electric stove, and OMG, she was livid. After my mother and our nanny had talked to the firemen, I remember we were all in the car together and my mom asked the babysitter what happened. Our nanny, in tears, said she had accidentally left the oven on before she left. Then she proceeded to say, "I accidentally left it on because my older sister was in a car accident." Apparently, my older sister and her friends were underage drinking and hit a parked car. Drinking and driving is terrible, by the way. Our nanny apparently was about to cook food when my older sister called her to tell her that she needed to be picked up immediately because the cops were on the way. She didn't want to be arrested for underage drinking, and she also was not the one driving. Our nanny said after hearing that, nothing mattered. She said she dropped the phone, left the house, accidentally leaving the stove on. That's my one and only experience with a psychic. They can be a channel, so I don't think it was just a coincidence. I don't know. What do you guys think? This took place back in 2014, and I'm not an author, so forgive me if my writing isn't up to snuff with the other posts on here. I was 17 years old, and I lived in a very small town in Massachusetts, and every night I would take walks after sundown. I enjoyed it. It was peaceful. Now, I understand that this whole setup is inherently sketchy, and walking around town in the dead of night is just asking for trouble. I was a very antisocial person, so I did it. Every night. I lived on a street about 4 miles long in total, and there would be a few houses every half mile or so, but for the most part things were pretty secluded, other than a decently sized cemetery that I would sometimes hang out at. Side note, a woman had committed suicide at the cemetery after being involved in some white-collar scandal. I never knew her or her family, and I mean no disrespect to them. There was also another cemetery in town which was pretty famous for alleged supernatural events that people used to do witchcraft in, very popular amongst ghost hunters and people into cheap scares. So our little town was kind of a hot spot for creepy stuff. The street had about 5 streetlights, and one of them was constantly bugging out and never got fixed. In order to get to the center of town, I'd have to walk a few miles, essentially in the pitch-black darkness with nothing but a mag light, my headphones, and my cell phone. Past the cemetery, at the end of the street, there was this local donut shop, and then the center. And I would listen to music in the dark, with the flashlight being the only decent light for miles until I got into town. I would wear this long black pea coat. At one point, I shaved my head completely bald so that people would think I was creepy and wouldn't bother me if they were driving down the road at that particular hour. The local police were familiar with me, my family, and our kind of messed up background. In 2013, my brother saved me from my dad after he tried to beat me up. He was beaten unconscious, and the police were called. After that, he left, and I haven't seen him since. That's not related to this story in any way. I think the cops realized I was a troubled kid, but not out to do anything malicious. Clean record, no fighting, stealing, or anything like that. And they kind of let me do my thing. I would often go into these weird fantasies where I was some vampire hunter who had to protect the town from the monsters that came out in the dark. I pretended I was some parody comic book hero called the Night Lurker who used a weaponized flashlight to fight evil. It was cringy and stupid, but it was mostly a joke, and I had an extremely overactive imagination. I try not to tell most people about that. What does all this have to do with the clown man? Absolutely nothing. Anyways, it was Halloween night. I was on one of my evening patrols and had gotten to the center of town. At the town center, there's this 24-hour gas station called Cumberland Farms. If you live in New England, it's most likely where you'll fill your tank or buy overpriced snacks. As I was walking up to the store, there was this extremely tall, slightly pot-bellied guy who was dressed like a clown, but his makeup made him look a bit more like Beetlejuice. He was staring at me with his eyes wide open and had a toothy grin. I pretty much figured it was Halloween and it was some guy trying to fuck with me for fun, so I said, "Happy Halloween, man," and kind of blew right past him into the store. Bought myself a soda and some candy, and when I walked out the door, he wasn't there anymore. I continued my walk, put my headphones on, and forgot about the guy. The whole town center is connected on Route 9 Main Street, and when I wanted to get around town, that was the road I'd walk on. So as I continue on, I let go of every single bit of common sense I had at that time, blasted my music to the point where I couldn't hear anything else, and just start running on autopilot because I'd done this so many times. After walking about a mile away from the gas station, there were no cars on the road, and I started to feel a bit uneasy. I looked back, and what do you know? This giant clown Beetlejuice-looking guy is about 5 feet behind me. The same expression on his face from before. Eyes wide, toothy grin. I also need to paint a picture of how tall this guy is. He must have been like 6'7" and was essentially towering over me. I'm 5'8". I kind of stop in my tracks, take my headphones off, and look at him. He just passes right by me, says, "Happy Halloween," in some weird-ass goofy clown voice, and continues walking down the street in front of me. That's the last interaction I have with him, but I keep my eyes on him as he continues walking. Last I saw him, he went into a subway parking lot and was peeking into the windows of people's cars. I get that the guy was clearly just trying to creep people out because it was Halloween night and it's fun, but the dude waited for me to leave the store, out of sight, and then proceeded to follow me down the street when I wasn't paying attention, just to say Happy Halloween and then dip. And I still had the entire length of the street my house was on to walk in the pitch black. Needless to say, I turned my music volume down and was constantly looking behind me my whole way home. Very creepy. I'm making this short for a plethora of reasons. I was 22 at the time. I was a full-time model and also was working for a writer and intelligent man who I looked up to and respected greatly. In fact, I looked at him as a father figure who would always protect me and have my best interests at heart. That was not the case. He was a pioneer in something regarding computers, a photographer, and many other things. Now, the first 2 years I worked as his personal assistant, things were fine. He was definitely odd, but I liked weird people because I'm weird myself. I learned a lot from working for him. That time period in my life is a combination of a David Lynch movie, a fever dream, a Lana Del Rey record, and isolation. So let's just get into the night I still have nightmares about. My boss and I were working in his country house in upstate New York. This wasn't out of the ordinary at all. We went up there to work on his book and for me to do research and put together files, organize, etc. I had my own room, and the place was gorgeous. It was completely desolate and eerie at the same time, but again, I felt safe with him and enjoyed being up there until this one night. I had a photo shoot the next morning in Connecticut where my boss would be driving me to, and his friend was the photographer, and he claimed he had business to do with Louis, the photographer. We worked all day the night prior to my shoot. When evening came around, my boss and I smoked a joint or three and talked. I had a couple of drinks, and so did he. I decided to have one more cigarette before going to my bedroom. His bedroom was at the top floor, and mine was next to the front door and the first bedroom to the left. Across from my room was my boss's office, where he would often be writing his books in. He was a night owl and got a lot of writing done at night. I was starting to doze off when I saw light coming from the bottom of my door, so I figured my boss went to go work in his office across from my room, which startled me. I heard him talking to someone, and I assumed he couldn't sleep, so he went to his office to write. I heard a strange old song playing on his record player. I thought this was odd. I cracked my door open a bit and saw my boss in my pink dress. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My life has always been weird, but this took the cake. He was dancing in my fucking dress and talking to himself. I heard him say, "I am blah blah." He was saying my stage name in different creepy tones. Weird. He had a bright red lipstick on, and suddenly he dropped to the floor, which scared the living shit out of me and made me gasp and cover my mouth. I put my hand over my mouth to avoid making any sound. He laid face down on his stomach and started humping the ground. This is when I got so freaked out I shut the door and locked it. I softly walked back in my bed and put the covers up to my eyes. I was hyperventilating and a brutal anxiety attack came on. I felt like my heart was coming out of my chest. I took my anti-anxiety meds and I remember trembling, trying not to make noise. After about 15 minutes, I saw him come up to my door, and he was standing there, not moving. I was completely frozen. He stood there and suddenly walked away. He turned the lights off in his office, past my door, and I heard him walk upstairs to his bedroom. The next morning, I went to get coffee and have breakfast, and there he was, at the kitchen table, flipping through the paper in his usual suit. I sat down, had some coffee, and my boss talked to me like nothing had happened. I decided to go get ready and get my things together for the photo shoot. I didn't feel safe anymore for many reasons. This man ended up manipulating, grooming, and just straight mind-fucking me for years to come. We never talked about that night, but that was the last time I ever stayed at his country house in the middle of nowhere. Also, I found the dress he was wearing, and it smelled like B.O. and creepy old man. I threw that dress out and just buried the memory of this happening. You really had to be there to understand the magnitude of how creepy this was and how creepy he was and is. Creepy asshole, I never want to see you ever again. You took advantage of a young girl with talent who already had anxiety and PTSD and made it 10 times worse. I often think, what was his intention that night? This is one of many awful experiences I had working for and with this guy. Ladies, please be careful about who you let into your life and never be afraid to stick up for yourself. Trust your gut and get as far away from predators and manipulative people as possible. R.I.P. to my pink dress and my sanity. This takes place in the summer of 2020. I had just started my new job of being a package handler, and boy, does it get really hot in those warehouses. Even though I had ice water in one of those thermostat-type bottles, I still had to fill it with more ice to keep cool and hydrated. Anyway, there was this other package handler, we'll call him Rick. Rick's truck was pretty far from mine. His was an '01 while I was a '15, so he would have to walk all the way down just to see me. I would be filling my truck when he would just stand by the entrance to the truck, just smiling and staring at me. I tried to make small talk with him, but he would just nod while smiling and then walk away. This happened a lot. Sometimes I would help out other trucks as well, or even just the small stuff, which were sorted into their own trucks. Anyone could help out with the small stuff, even Rick. I wasn't sure why he never spoke to me at first, just stared and smiled. Honestly, I was crept out by it. But I didn't want to judge anyone either. I chalked it up to him just being shy or something. Soon I was moved to an '04, which meant I was just about right next to Rick. There was no '03 being filled at the time, and Rick worked on my '01 and '02. I had a difficult time with '04, so I would mostly be stuck with my truck and unable to help out others. Oftentimes, Rick would show up and watch me fill the truck. There was a time he actually helped me out a little bit, too, with the really heavy stuff that I couldn't carry by myself. Rick would come and bother me more and more. He made it even more difficult for me to work on my truck when I was already having a difficult time with it. Sometimes, when I was in the back of the truck, I would come back to him standing in my way, kind of looming over me, and he wouldn't budge, almost like he was trying to trap me in. Then at some point, he started poking me. He would poke my stomach, and I would ask if he would stop because I needed to focus on my truck. Well, one night, he gave my stomach a poke. I admit that I'm ticklish, so I couldn't help but laugh. I tried to ignore him because I was already uncomfortable and I was really behind on my truck. Then he told me, word for word, if there wasn't a camera, I'd poke a little higher. I froze because I knew he was talking about poking my chest. Now, I must admit, I have a very large chest. They've caused me problems my whole life because of how big they are. I would have to say it's the first thing anyone would notice about me, unfortunately. I grew tired of Rick's harassment. I had a hard time telling my supervisor, but I ended up telling her everything. She immediately took action. Rick was told to stay at home while this was under investigation and get his statement. Fortunately, luck was on my side. The trucks had cameras and they could see that he trapped me in my truck a lot and also bothered me. Plus, the package handler in '06 constantly saw Rick approaching my truck and not leaving me alone. So, he was fired. I almost broke down to my supervisor when she told me because my other bosses at my other jobs wouldn't care and allowed me to keep working with harassment. I don't know where Rick is now or what he's doing. I just hope he's not harassing anyone else. But I sure was glad to be free of him. Hello again, little Vickies. Thanks so much for listening. Please remember to subscribe if you haven't already, hit the thumbs up button, and leave a comment, as it's all very helpful to my growth here on YouTube. Remember, if you have a story of your own you'd like to share and possibly have read on the channel, send it to the email in the description below. I appreciate you being here more than I can say. And until next time, be good.